The woman in Unit 412 had been watching apartment 206 for 8 months before she finally decided to do something about it. What she did was block the laundry room door with her body. She had her phone raised, the camera lens pointed at the man standing 4 feet away with a basket of damp clothes balanced against his hip and a sleeping child pressed to his chest. The child was 2 years old. She wore a cotton shirt with a stain on the collar that had survived 3 wash cycles, and a pair of leggings a size too small because she had grown again and he had not had time to replace them. Her fingers were curled into the fabric at his shoulder, the way they always curled when sound tried to pull her out of sleep. The woman told him she had seen enough. She told him she had seen the child in the same clothes for days, seen the apartment with the mattress on the floor, seen the girl handed off to strangers at odd hours while he disappeared. She told him she had already made a call. She told him people were coming. She told him somebody was finally going to look inside that apartment and see what the whole building already knew. He set the laundry basket on the folding table. He did not set down the child. He adjusted the girl's weight against his chest, so her head stayed cradled in the space between his jaw and his shoulder. He looked at the woman and said only that his daughter was sleeping and that he would be happy to talk another time. She did not move. Behind her, through the glass door that opened onto the parking lot, a black Chevrolet Suburban with federal plates pulled in beside the dumpster and stopped. 2 people stepped out. One of them wore a navy windbreaker with 3 gold letters across the back. The toddler stirred against her father's neck. The letters were large enough to read through the glass. But the thing about those letters, and the thing about what that man had been carrying for the past 2 years in that apartment, was not the ending of this story. It was not even close to the beginning. The beginning was 8 months earlier. The beginning was a small child sitting alone on a bare kitchen floor at 6 in the morning with nothing but a sleeve of crackers and the sound of the building's pipes, while every neighbor on the floor heard her and kept their doors closed. If this is the first time you are hearing one of these stories, I need you to do something before we go further. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from. Then subscribe and ring the bell, because what this father and this little girl lived through in silence, and what nobody in that building chose to do about it, is the kind of story that needs to be heard all the way to the end. His name was Elliot Sable. He was 34 years old. He lived in apartment 206 of the Greystone Terrace complex on Roxborough Street in Durham, North Carolina, in a building set back from the road behind a parking lot that was always too full and a row of crepe myrtles that bloomed every July, whether anyone noticed or not. He had moved there 7 months after his wife died, not because he had planned to, because the house in Raleigh where Simone had picked out the kitchen tile and hung wooden shelves above the stove had become a place he could not afford on one income and could not stay in regardless. He gave back the keys. He found a listing for a 2-bedroom unit that said nothing about the radiator that clanked from November through March or the bathroom fan that hadn't worked since the previous tenant left. He signed the lease on a Thursday and moved in over the following weekend with a rented cargo van, a car seat, 43 boxes, and a 7-month-old daughter who slept through most of the move and woke up in a new place looking around with the calm, patient expression of someone who had already learned that the world did not stay still. Elliot had a degree in criminal justice from North Carolina Central University and a master's in forensic accounting from George Washington University, completed at night while working full-time, driving to D.C. 2 evenings a week for 14 months. He worked for Homeland Security investigations. He had been a special agent for 9 years, starting in document fraud, moving through financial crimes, and transferring 4 years before Naya was born into the Child Exploitation Investigations Unit because he had read a case file involving a 3-year-old in Fayetteville and had not been able to set it down, not because he was emotional, because he could see the financial structures underneath the abuse. He could trace the payments. He could follow the accounts and the aliases and the hosting services and the shell companies. He had a mind that did not let go of threads once it found them, and the unit needed that more than any other division he had ever worked in. His badge and credentials were in a lockbox on the top shelf of his bedroom closet, behind winter coats his daughter would not need for months. His service weapon was in a biometric safe bolted to the floor, underneath a quilt that Simone had brought back from a weekend trip to Asheville the year they were married. He did not display the badge. He did not talk about the work. The lease listed his employer as the Department of Homeland Security, which was true and practically meaningless to anyone who read it, and that was the point. None of that was visible to the people at Greystone Terrace. What was visible in those first months after he moved in was something else entirely. Simone had died 22 months before the laundry room confrontation. She died suddenly and medically, and Elliot had been at work when the call came and had driven to Duke University Hospital in 11 minutes from a field office that was 19 minutes away. When he arrived, She was in a room where no one was moving quickly anymore. Naya had been with Simone's mother in Greensboro that afternoon because Simone had a dentist appointment and did not like to bring the baby. Naya was not there. She would never know what that room looked like. Elliot had decided in the first 5 minutes of sitting in it that he would never describe it. What followed the death and the funeral and the weeks at Simone's mother's house in Greensboro was a period that Elliot did not have a name for. He returned to work because the work was there and because Naya had to eat. He came home to a daughter who was 7 months old, and then 8, and then 10, and who needed things at all hours, and he learned to provide those things the way a person learns to navigate in the dark, slowly, by feel, making mistakes he corrected, and then made again. There was no system yet. There was no routine. There was survival in its plainest form. Naya cried at 2 in the morning, and again at 4, and Elliot got up both times, because there was no one else. He made bottles in the dark with the kitchen light off, because the overhead bulb had burned out 2 days after he moved in, and he had not gotten a replacement yet. He drove to work on 4 hours of sleep, so many days in a row that Victor Tran, his colleague in the Charlotte field office, started opening every phone call with the same question. When did you last sleep more than 5 consecutive hours? Elliot would calculate. He would say the answer. Victor would not respond to it directly. He would just move on to the case. The apartment looked the way apartments look when a single person is trying to do the work of 2 without the time, the energy, or the roadmap. Boxes that had not been unpacked sat in the second bedroom for 11 weeks. The mattress frame had been delivered damaged and returned, and the replacement had not come yet, so Naya's sleeping area was a floor bed, a setup Simone had researched and wanted before she died. Low to the ground, safe for an infant learning to move, but which from the outside, to anyone who glimpsed it through an open door, looked like a mattress on the floor. The kitchen table had 4 chairs, and only one of them was cleared well enough to sit in. Dishes got done when he had 15 minutes, which some days he had and some days he did not. Naya wore what was clean. Sometimes what was clean was not the outfit he would have chosen. Sometimes it was the same shirt 2 days running because the other shirts were in the hamper, and the hamper was full, and the laundry room was 3 floors down, and by the time he thought of it, the laundry room was either occupied or it was 10 at night, and Naya was asleep, and he was not going to leave her alone to go do laundry. He was not going to do that. So the shirt had a stain, and the leggings were from last month, and that was what it was. He did not ask for help. This was not stubbornness. It was the particular paralysis of a man who had always been competent, who had always managed, and who did not yet have the language for the specific kind of exhaustion he was inside. He could call Victor. He called Victor every other day, but Victor was a colleague, not a neighbor, and was in Charlotte, and what Elliot needed at 11 on a Wednesday night was not a phone call but a second person in the apartment, and that was not something he knew how to ask a colleague for. The neighbors heard Naya cry. They heard it on the nights it was bad, through walls that were not particularly thick. They heard it and they closed their doors. They saw Elliot in the hallway with dark circles under his eyes and a child in mismatched clothes and a face that said, "Leave it alone," and they left it alone. Not out of cruelty, out of the ordinary human preference for not getting involved in things that did not directly concern them. The same preference that allows a floor full of people to hear a child and decide it is not their business. No one knocked. No one left a note. No one said, "I have some food if you need it," or "I am home on Tuesdays if you ever need an extra set of hands." No one said anything at all, and so Naya, in those first months at Greystone Terrace, existed in an apartment that looked to anyone who caught a glimpse like a place where a child was not being taken care of. She was being taken care of. Her father was doing everything he could with what he had, but what it looked like from the outside, and what every neighbor chose to overlook, was a small girl living in conditions that no one in that building was going to lift a finger to address. No one helped, not one person, except that was not quite true. One person watched. She just did not watch in the way that led to help. Beverly Landon had lived at Greystone Terrace for 11 years. She owned her unit. She was 61 years old, retired from hospital administration at Duke Regional, and she carried herself with the authority of a person who had spent 3 decades making sure that systems ran and people did not get away with things. She was not a cruel woman. She had raised 2 children of her own, both grown, both out of state. She kept the hallway outside her door swept. She organized the annual tenant appreciation cookout. She was the one who got the management company to replace the mailboxes in 2019 after someone broke into 3 of them on the same night. Her grandson lived in Portland, and she saw him twice a year. She kept his school photograph on the refrigerator next to a magnet from the Durham Performing Arts Center. She watered the ferns on her balcony every morning at 7. She attended Mount Zion Baptist on alternate Sundays and brought pound cake to the fellowship hall on the 3rd Sunday of every other month. health. She was a person of structure. She believed that the absence of structure in a home was the first symptom of something worse. She noticed Elliot within his first week. She noticed the apartment with almost nothing in it. She noticed the mattress on the floor visible through the open door when he carried in boxes. She noticed the child, small and quiet, wearing clothes that were not always clean. She noticed him leaving before dawn and sometimes not returning until after dark. She noticed the different people who came and went, picking up the child or dropping her off at hours that did not make sense for a regular job. In those early months, she heard what the rest of the floor heard: the crying at 2 in the morning, the long stretches of silence after. She stood in her kitchen at 2:15 one Tuesday and listened to it, and then she poured herself a glass of water and went back to bed. She told herself she was watching, observing, building a picture. She did not knock on the door and ask if he needed anything. She did not leave a container of food outside his door. She did not stop him in the hallway and say, "I hear your baby at night, and I am in Unit 412, and if you ever need anything, I am here." She watched, and she judged, and she built her case. In October, 3 months after he moved in, she submitted a written complaint to the property management company. She described the condition of the apartment as she imagined it. She described the child as undernourished, a word from her hospital years. She described the father as neglectful and possibly involved in activities she could not identify. In November, she called the Durham County Department of Social Services. She told them about the child. She told them about the clothes and the mattress and the strangers. She used the phrase living like a slave. She said it clearly and more than once. She did not say, "I heard that child cry for months and I never knocked on the door." She did not say, "I watched from my window and never came down." She did not say, "I had a spare casserole dish full of food every other Sunday, and it never occurred to me to bring any of it to apartment 206. In December, a DSS caseworker named Patricia Wynn visited the apartment. By then, things had changed. Mrs. Yolanda Price on Mangum Street had been watching Naya for 2 months. Victor Tran had driven up from Charlotte on a Sunday in September and spent 4 hours helping Elliot unpack the second bedroom and put together a proper storage shelf for Naya's things. Deirdre Falk, Elliot's old supervisor, had sent a package from Richmond with a note that said only, "For when you run out of time," and inside were 6 months' worth of pre-portioned, labeled freezer meals. The apartment was clean. The refrigerator was stocked. The child was healthy. The caseworker noted all of this. The case was closed in January with no findings. Beverly was not satisfied. She interpreted the closure as a failure of the system. She began keeping a composition notebook in which she recorded dates and times and descriptions of every person she saw entering or leaving Elliot's apartment. She mentioned her concerns to other tenants. She used words like, "Something is not right in that apartment, and somebody needs to look out for that little girl." She said somebody. She did not mean herself. She had already decided that her role in this was observer and reporter, not the one who knocked on a door and asked a man how he was holding up. The irony was that by the time Beverly started watching most intently, the worst was already over. Elliot had found his footing. The apartment had a routine. Naya had Mrs. Price and her color-coded bins, and a whiteboard schedule, and 3 other children to sit beside at circle time. Elliot still left before dawn and still returned at hours that varied, but Naya ate 3 meals a day, and her clothes were mostly clean, and the floor bed was no longer because of a damaged frame, but because Simone had wanted it, and it worked, and Naya slept through the night on it without issue. But Beverly had formed her conclusion during the dark months, and conclusions once formed by people who believe they are right do not require new evidence to maintain themselves. They require only that you stop looking for any. In the hallway, she was cold to him. At the mailboxes, she stood close enough to make him step aside. In March, she followed him to the laundry room and stood in the doorway and told him that people were paying attention. He looked at her. He loaded the dryer. He left. He could have told her who he was. He could have shown the badge and ended the year of hostile silences in 30 seconds. He did not out of pride, because he was in the middle of something that required that nobody in this building know what he did for a living. The operation was called Fallow Ground. It had been active for 14 months. It involved a network of unlicensed daycares operating across central North Carolina that were functioning as fronts for labor trafficking of children under the age of 5. The children were brought in from out of state, documented as enrolled in childcare, and used for work ranging from domestic labor in private homes to tasks in small cash-only manufacturing operations that kept no records. The children had no advocates. Their parents, where parents existed, had been coerced or paid or were undocumented and terrified. The network was built on paperwork that looked ordinary: licensing applications, tax filings, payment records from state childcare subsidy programs. Elliot had been assigned to Fallow Ground because he was the best financial analyst in the region. His colleague on the case was Victor Tran, 12 years in child exploitation work, a man who spoke with the flat calm of someone who had learned long ago that urgency did not help. They spoke most evenings after Naya was in bed. They reviewed documents on a shared encrypted drive. They coordinated with prosecutors in 3 districts and with a forensic accountant at Treasury who owed Victor a favor and was willing to work weekends. The scope was larger than anything Elliot had worked since Operation Linden Street in 2021, which had produced 14 arrests and the identification of 23 children across 4 states. Fallow Ground touched 7 counties, 18 addresses, at least 31 identified children, and a dozen more who existed only as line items in financial documents. Children billed for, but never enrolled, whose names might not have been real. Elliot worked the case from the small desk in the second bedroom, 3 feet from Naya's floor bed, reviewing spreadsheets that described transactions involving children the same age as the girl breathing behind him. Some nights, Victor texted at 11 or midnight with a new connection, a new name, a new shell company. Elliot got up and opened the laptop and followed the thread until it ended, or until Naya woke and padded over with the plastic dinosaur in her hand and pressed her face against his knee. The people Beverly documented in her composition notebook were colleagues: Victor, who had driven up from Charlotte 3 times to work in person; Dana Coe, a victim specialist who came twice to review interview protocols; a prosecutor named James Ashford, who had stopped by once to sign a warrant application requiring a physical signature. They came at odd hours because the case operated at odd hours. They did not carry visible badges because the operational security protocols for Fallow Ground were the same that applied to any active case involving child victims not yet recovered. If anyone in the network became aware that a federal agent lived in this building, with neighbors calling social services and documenting visitors, the risk was real. People who trafficked children did not file appeals. They moved, they destroyed records, and the 31 children Elliot had identified would become ghosts again. So he said nothing. He put his clothes in the dryer. He carried his daughter upstairs. He walked past Beverly Landon's door and went home. The call came on a Tuesday in April at 6:14 in the morning. Elliot was holding the ginger turmeric tea he had not yet set on the counter. Naya was still asleep. Victor's name was on the screen. Elliot set the mug down, poured it out, dressed, called Mrs. Price, who said yes without asking why, because she had known him long enough to understand that when he called before 6:30, the reason was the reason. By 8 o'clock, he was in a coordination room with 14 agents, 3 prosecutors, and a representative from the Department of Labor. By 9, the first warrants were being served. By the end of the day, 11 people had been arrested across 6 counties, and 27 children had been recovered from locations that included a house in Sanford, a converted garage in Ashboro, and a daycare in Siler City that had passed 3 state inspections in the previous year. Fallow Ground was the largest child labor trafficking case in North Carolina in a decade. That evening, Elliot picked up Naya from Mrs. Price and drove home. He parked in his usual spot. He carried her up the stairs. He passed Beverly's closed door. He went inside and started dinner: rice and black beans and a banana cut in half. 3 days later was the laundry room. Beverly had not known about the arrests. She did not watch federal press conferences. She did not read Department of Justice releases. She knew only what she had decided to know, which was that the man in 206 was not right and the child was not safe. She chose the laundry room because it was enclosed, and because she had seen him carry the basket down the hall, and because she believed confrontation required a contained space. She stood in the doorway. She delivered the speech she had been composing for weeks. She told him what she had seen. She told him who she had called. She told him someone was going to look inside that apartment. He set the basket down. He held his daughter. He asked if they could talk another time. And then the Suburban pulled in. Victor Tran and Dana Coe stepped out. Victor was wearing the Navy HSI windbreaker from the Raleigh debrief. Dana was carrying a folder of post-operation signatures. They were not there because of Beverly. They were not there because of the laundry room. They were there because the paperwork for Fallow Ground was due by the end of week. Victor opened the glass door and looked at Elliot, and then at Beverly, and then back at Elliot. He had the expression of a man who has walked into the middle of something and is already calculating whether it is his problem. Elliot said nothing. Victor said, "We can come back." Elliot said, "No, come in." They stepped inside. Victor's windbreaker had HSY across the back in gold block print, and beneath it, in smaller letters, Homeland Security Investigations. He turned to set the folder on the table, and the letters faced Beverly directly. She read them. She read them again. She looked at Victor. She looked at Dana. She looked at Elliot, who was still holding the sleeping child against his chest. Dana said, "Agent Sable, we just need 20 minutes for the post-op signatures." She said it looking at her folder, the way people say things when they do not know they are detonating a room. Beverly's hand, the one not holding the phone, went to the door frame. She held it the way a person holds something when the floor has shifted. Elliot looked at her. He did not explain. He did not correct the months of complaints and documentation and hostile silences. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has finally arrived at a fact he has known for a long time. He said, "If you will excuse us, we have some work to finish." He picked up the laundry basket. He adjusted Naya on his shoulder. He walked past Beverly Landon and up the stairs and into his apartment, and Victor and Dana followed, and the door closed behind them. Naya made a sound against his neck, a small hum, tuneless, the sound she made when she was half asleep and the world was moving around her, and she was deciding whether to care. Beverly did not go upstairs. She stood in the laundry room for a moment after they left. The folding table, the humming dryers, the glass door that showed the parking lot and the black Suburban and nothing else. Then she went to her car, even though she lived in the same building and had no reason to drive anywhere. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the windows up. She thought about the composition notebook in her kitchen drawer. Every entry, the woman with the folder, the man in the dark jacket who had driven up from Charlotte, the prosecutor who came once with a briefcase. She had written them all down with the specificity of someone building a case. What she had built was a record of her own blindness, organized by date and weather. She thought about the phrase she had used when she called social services, living like a slave. She had believed it when she said it. She had said it with authority. She thought about where that authority had come from and what it had been made of, and she stayed with that question longer than was comfortable. She thought about the nights she had heard Naya crying through the wall, the Tuesday at 2 in the morning when she had stood in her kitchen and poured herself a glass of water and gone back to bed. She thought about the Sunday afternoons when she had made too much food and thrown the extra away. She thought about every morning she had watched from her balcony window as Elliot loaded Naya into the Honda and driven off, and every evening she had watched him come back, and all the months in between when she had documented and reported and complained and never once walked down one flight of stairs to knock on a door and ask a man if he was okay. She had used the word slave, and she had let a child she believed was suffering sit one floor below her for 8 months without offering her a single thing. The composition notebook was upstairs in the kitchen drawer. She did not go up to open it. She sat in her car until the parking lot lights came on. The next morning, Elliot made the tea. He poured the water over the ginger turmeric bag in the cracked ceramic mug that had a hairline fracture along the handle. The mug Simone had kept stocked with traditional medicinals the way other people kept coffee. He set it on the counter by the window and went to wake Naya. She was already sitting up on the floor bed, holding the plastic dinosaur, humming something with no melody and no end. He picked her up. He carried her to the kitchen. He put her in the high chair and started peeling a banana halfway so she could finish the job. She did it with the seriousness of someone performing surgery. She said, "Daddy, is the lady mad at us?" He stopped. He was holding the banana peel. He said, "Which lady?" though he knew which one. "The loud lady," Naya said. He set the peel on the counter. He said, "She was not mad at us. She was worried about something." Naya looked at him. She said, "Was she worried about me?" He pulled the high chair a little closer. He said, "She was, but she does not need to be anymore." Naya thought about this. She ate a piece of banana slowly, and then she said, "I am not worried," and went back to humming. He stood in the kitchen and let the sentence sit where she had left it. It was the truest thing anyone had said in that apartment in a long time. Victor called in the afternoon and asked about the laundry room, and Elliot said she was a neighbor. Victor paused the way he always paused when deciding whether to push. "She looked like she was about to call the National Guard on you," Victor said. Elliot said, "She has been concerned for a while." Victor laughed. "Short and not unkind," he said, concerned. "That is a generous word, brother." Elliot did not respond to that. He asked about the fallow ground debriefs. Victor said the Sanford arrests had produced documentation to expand into a new county. 2 more children identified from financial records. The Treasury accountant had found a second layer of shell companies. 6 more months minimum. Elliot said he would be ready. Victor said he knew. 2 weeks after the laundry room, a plain white envelope arrived in Elliot's mailbox. The HSI Executive Associate Director commending his work on Operation Fallow Ground, exceptional analytical contribution, critical role in the identification and recovery of victims, printed on Department of Homeland Security letterhead, addressed to Special Agent Elliot R. Sable. He read it standing at the mailbox. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and carried it upstairs and placed it in the manila folder in the filing cabinet in the closet, behind the quilt, next to the gun safe, on top of the letter from Linden Street. He closed the cabinet. He went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Naya was in the other room having a foot problem with her left shoe. A Saturday morning in May. Elliot was unloading groceries from the Accord when Beverly Landon came down the stairs carrying a glass baking dish covered in aluminum foil. She crossed the parking lot toward him, with the careful deliberateness of a person who has rehearsed what she is about to do but has not committed to the words that go with it. She stopped at the back of his car. She held the dish forward. She said she she had made too much cobbler, that it was peach, that she thought maybe Naya might like some. He looked at the dish. He looked at Beverly. She was holding it with both hands, fingers tight on the edges, eyes on the dish rather than his face, as though it might explain something on her behalf. He took it. He said, "Thank you. You did not have to do that." She said, "I know." She stood a moment longer. She opened her mouth and then closed it. The rehearsed words did not come. She nodded once and turned back toward the stairs. Naya appeared in the apartment doorway above them, plastic dinosaur in hand. She looked down at Beverly on the stairs and said, loudly and with complete indifference to context, "Is that the loud lady?" Beverly stopped. Her hand found the railing. She did not turn around. She stood on the fourth step for a long count of 3, and then she continued up and disappeared around the landing. Elliot looked up at his daughter. He said, "Come inside, please." Naya said, "She brought us something." He said she did. Naya said, "Is it for the dinosaur too?" He said, "I think we can share." He carried the cobbler upstairs. He set it on the counter next to the cracked mug, which was dry and turned upside down on the drying rack. The foil had a crease where Beverly's thumb had pressed it. The dish was still warm. That evening, after Naya was asleep on the floor bed with the dinosaur at her side, and the room quiet except for the radiator that would knock for another 2 weeks, Elliot sat at the desk and opened the laptop. New message from Victor, new financial records, new names in a new county. He read them line by line, the way he read everything, patient and complete, while his daughter breathed behind him, and the city went dark outside the window that still did not have a curtain because he had not gotten to it yet. He had not gotten to a lot of things yet. The curtain, the second shelf in the bathroom, the frames for the photographs of Simone that were still in a box in the closet next to the quilt. He would get to them, not tonight. Not because tonight was hard, but because tonight there was work, and the work was not finished, and there were children in it who were still waiting for someone to find them. He closed the laptop at midnight. He checked on Naya, who had rolled to the edge of the bed and was sleeping with one arm hanging off the side and her mouth open. He adjusted her blanket. He picked up the dinosaur from the floor and placed it within reach of her hand. He went to the kitchen. He filled the kettle and stood in the dark while the water heated. He took down the cracked mug. He dropped in the tea. He watched the color spread through the water. He set it on the counter by the window. He would pour it out in the morning. He always did, but for now it sat in the dark apartment, steaming, filling the kitchen with a scent that belonged to someone who was not there, and would not be there, and whose absence was the shape of every room in that apartment, every morning, every night. He turned off the light. He walked down the hallway. He stopped at Naya's door with one hand on the frame and stood there a moment, listening to her breathe, and then he went to bed. There are people in this world who watch a child struggle and decide it is not their business, who hear crying through a wall and pour a glass of water and go back to sleep, who see a man carrying everything alone and choose the quiet comfort of not getting involved. They are not monsters. They are ordinary. That is what makes it so hard to look at. And then there are people like Elliot Sable, who get up at 5, who make the tea they will pour out cold because some rituals are not for performance, they are for keeping, who sit in the second bedroom 3 feet from a sleeping 2-year-old and spend the dark hours tracing money through shell companies to find children that nobody else was looking for, who carry their daughter to daycare and come back and peel the banana halfway so she can finish it, who do not explain themselves to people who have not asked. Naya did not know the name of the operation her father had worked on for 14 months while she slept. She didn't know about the 27 children who came home in April. She didn't know about the letters in the manila folder behind the quilt. She knew that when she woke up in the mornings, her father was there. She knew that the banana was peeled halfway. She knew that the plastic dinosaur went with her into the dark rooms, and that he always came back whatever hour it was. She called her shoe situation a foot problem. She hummed while she worked. She held the dinosaur at chest height like a lantern. She was fine, she told him. She was not worried. And in the way that very small children sometimes know things long before they have the words for them, she was right.